Robert "Rob" Mitchell adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror of his downtown law office. The reflection revealed a man who'd built everything from nothing. At 45, his steel gray eyes held the intensity of someone who'd clawed his way from a trailer park in Oklahoma to owning one of Denver's most successful criminal defense practices. Every scar, every callus on his hands told the story of a man who'd worked construction through law school and who'd learned that the world respected only those who demanded respect. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent 20 years defending criminals, learning their methods, their weaknesses, their patterns, knowledge that would soon prove invaluable. Diana Mitchell stood in their $2.8 million home's kitchen, her manicured fingers drumming against the marble countertop as she watched her 18-year-old daughter, Emma, pack for what was supposed to be a cultural exchange program in Moldova. Diana's beauty had always been her weapon. Blonde hair perfectly styled, her figure maintained through expensive trainers and procedures. But at 42, she'd grown restless with the suburban princess role. "You sure about this trip, sweetheart?" Diana asked Emma, though her tone carried none of the concern a mother should feel. Emma, who'd inherited her father's determination and her mother's beauty, looked up from her suitcase. "Mom, we've been planning this for months. The State Department cleared it, and Dad already." "Your father worries too much," Diana interrupted, exchanging a meaningful glance with her sister Caroline, who'd been staying with them for the past month. Caroline, 2 years younger than Diana, had always lived in her shadow, but possessed the same calculating nature beneath a sweeter exterior. What Emma didn't know was that Moldova had been designated a do-not-travel country just 3 days earlier due to civil unrest. What she also didn't know was that Diana had orchestrated this entire trip as part of a larger plan that would soon unfold. Trevor Walsh sat in his BMW outside the Mitchell house, watching through the windows. At 38, Trevor was everything Rob wasn't. He had inherited wealth, an Ivy League education, and the kind of smooth charm that had convinced Diana she deserved better than a blue-collar lawyer who'd gotten lucky. Trevor's family owned a chain of luxury hotels, giving him the perfect cover for international travel and offshore accounts. For the past year, Trevor and Diana had been planning more than just an affair. They'd been planning a complete takeover of Rob's life, his practice, his assets, and his daughter's trust fund that Rob had been managing. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Get Emma out of the country and stranded, force Rob to liquidate assets to rescue her, then use the crisis to trigger the carefully crafted prenup clauses that would leave Rob with nothing. Rob arrived home that evening to find the house buzzing with activity. Emma was showing her luggage to Caroline, who was filming everything on her phone for memories. Diana stood nearby, her smile just a bit too bright. "How's my world traveler?" Rob asked, wrapping Emma in a warm hug. She was his pride, the one pure thing in his life, Stanford-bound, brilliant, and kind, everything he'd hoped to give the world. "Dad, I promise I'll be careful," the program coordinator said. "I know, sweetheart. I checked them out myself." What Rob didn't mention was that his investigation had turned up several red flags about the program's legitimacy. But Emma had been so excited, and Diana had been so supportive, that he'd convinced himself he was being paranoid. That night, as Diana pretended to sleep beside him, Rob stared at the ceiling. His instincts, honed by years of reading people in courtrooms, screamed that something was wrong. Diana had been different lately, distant, but simultaneously excited about something. She'd been taking more trips to visit Caroline, coming home with expensive gifts she claimed were from her sister's modeling work. But Rob had learned long ago to trust his gut. He'd started quietly investigating 3 weeks earlier, hiring a private investigator named Luis Moreno, a former police detective who specialized in domestic cases. What Luis had found so far was circumstantial but troubling. Diana had been meeting regularly with a man at expensive hotels, had opened a separate bank account, and had been researching divorce law in Colorado. The next morning, Rob stood in the driveway as Emma climbed into the taxi that would take her to the airport. He hugged her tight, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, memorizing the moment. "I love you, Dad. Take care of Mom while I'm gone." "I love you too, sweetheart. Call me the second you land." As the taxi disappeared down their tree-lined street, Rob noticed Diana watching from the window, and for just a moment, her expression wasn't that of a worried mother. It was the expression of someone watching a plan come together. Rob went to his office that day with a heavy heart, but also with the methodical mindset that had made him successful. He called Luis from his private line. "I need you to accelerate the investigation. Something's happening, and I need to know what before it's too late. Rob, I've got some preliminary findings. You might want to sit down for this. Just tell me. Your wife's been in contact with Trevor Walsh for over a year. Hotel meetings, restaurant meetings, even a weekend trip to Aspen last month when she said she was at a spa. But that's not the strangest part. Walsh has been asking questions about your daughter's trust fund, about your business assets, about your travel patterns. And Rob, Moldova just got put on the State Department's do not travel list yesterday." Rob's blood ran cold. "What did you just say?" "Your daughter's flying into a country that's basically under a travel ban, and your wife knew about it." Rob hung up the phone and stared out his office window at the Denver skyline. He'd built his reputation defending people who'd been cornered, who'd been betrayed, who'd had their backs against the wall. He knew exactly what cornered animals did. When they finally realized the truth, they became predators. Emma's phone call came at 2:47 a.m., Denver time. Rob was already awake, having spent the night researching Moldova's current political situation and growing more concerned by the hour. "Dad?" Emma's voice was small, scared. "Something's really wrong here. The program coordinator never showed up at the airport, and the address they gave me doesn't exist. The embassy is closed because of some kind of emergency, and I can't find my passport." Rob's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you mean you can't find your passport?" "It's gone, Dad. I had it when I went through security in Denver, but when I got to Chisinau, it wasn't in my bag. The officials here are saying I can't leave without it, and the American consulate won't even answer their phones." While Rob was on the phone with Emma, Diana sat in the living room with Caroline. Both of them listened to every word through the baby monitor they'd hidden in Rob's home office months earlier. Diana's face held a cold satisfaction. "Poor little Emma," Caroline said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Stranded in a foreign country, no money, no documents. Whatever will Daddy do?" Diana smiled, the expression transforming her beautiful face into something unsettling. "He'll liquidate everything he can get his hands on, the retirement accounts, the business assets, maybe even sell his precious law practice. And when he does, our friend Trevor will be ready to help him make some very expensive mistakes." What Diana didn't know was that Rob had installed his own surveillance system in the house 6 months earlier, after his lawyer's instincts had started screaming warnings. Every word of their conversation was being recorded in a secure cloud server that only Rob could access. Rob spent the next hour on the phone with State Department officials, embassy staff, and anyone else who might help. The story was always the same. Moldova was in chaos. American citizens were being evacuated when possible, But Emma would need proper documentation before she could leave. A replacement passport would take weeks to process through normal channels. Then came the call that made everything clear. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Trevor Walsh. I understand you're having some trouble with your daughter's situation overseas." Rob's voice was ice. "How exactly do you know about my daughter?" "I have some contacts in international business. I might be able to help, for a fee. You see, I know people who can expedite certain processes, get documents moved through channels that might otherwise take months, but time is money, and my contacts don't work for free." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about $3 million transferred to an account I'll specify. In return, your daughter gets safely home within 48 hours. Consider it a business transaction." Rob felt the rage building in his chest, but his voice remained controlled. "And what makes you think I have access to that kind of money on short notice?" "Come now, Mr. Mitchell. You're a successful attorney with a thriving practice. I'm sure you can liquidate some assets, tap into some accounts. Your daughter's safety is worth whatever it costs, isn't it?" After hanging up, Rob sat in his office and began to see the entire picture. Emma's passport hadn't been lost. It had been stolen, probably by someone working with Trevor. The fake cultural exchange program had been designed to get her to Moldova, just as the country became dangerous. And now, Trevor was positioning himself as the only solution, demanding money that would conveniently bankrupt Rob and force him to sell his most valuable assets. The final piece of the puzzle came when Rob drove home and heard Diana on the phone in their bedroom. "That was hilarious," Diana was saying, her voice full of cruel amusement. "You should have seen her face when she realized the program was fake, standing there in the airport with nowhere to go." Caroline's laugh was equally cold. "I still can't believe we pulled it off. Little Miss Perfect, stranded without a passport in a country that's falling apart. Daddy's going to have to choose between his money and his precious daughter. And when he chooses Emma, like we know he will, he'll lose everything else. The prenup kicks in if he liquidates more than 40% of his assets within a 6-month period. Trevor gets me. I get half of what's left, and Rob gets to start over from nothing." Rob stood in his hallway, listening to his wife and sister-in-law celebrate their daughter's terror and his impending destruction. The sound of their laughter would stay with him forever. But Diana and Caroline had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Rob would play by their rules, would take the path they'd laid out for him. They'd forgotten that he'd spent 20 years learning how criminals thought, how they planned, how they left themselves vulnerable. Rob didn't yell. He didn't confront them. He didn't make emotional threats or desperate pleas. Instead, he started making moves. The first call was to Luis Moreno. "I need you to dig deeper into Trevor Walsh. Financial records, business dealings, anything illegal or questionable. Money, no object." The second call was to a different contact, Marcus Reed, a former client who'd beaten murder charges on a technicality and who now ran certain types of businesses that operated in legal gray areas. Marcus owed Rob his life and freedom. "I need a favor, Marcus. The kind that requires complete discretion and certain specialized skills." "What do you need, counselor?" "I need a passport retrieved from someone who shouldn't have it. I need it done quietly, and I need the person who took it to understand they've made a very serious mistake." The third call was to his bank, where he began setting up certain financial instruments that would look like asset liquidation, but were actually sophisticated traps designed to catch anyone trying to steal from him. By morning, the pieces were in motion. Diana and Caroline woke up to find Rob already gone, having left a note saying he was at the office arranging Emma's rescue. They had no idea that police were already positioning themselves outside Trevor Walsh's luxury apartment, armed with warrants that Rob had helped arrange through his extensive contacts in law enforcement. They had no idea that Emma's passport was already being retrieved by people who specialized in that sort of thing. And they had no idea that their phone conversations, their meetings, their entire conspiracy had been documented in ways that would soon make their lives very, very complicated. Diana checked her phone and found a text from Trevor. Phase 2 starts today. By tonight, he'll be ruined. She smiled and showed it to Caroline. This is going to be even easier than we thought. Neither of them noticed the black SUVs that had been parked across the street since dawn. The phone rang at exactly 6 a.m., jolting Diana from sleep. Trevor's name flashed on the screen, but when she answered, his voice was tight with panic. They took everything, Diana. The FBI, the IRS, Homeland Security. They're calling it an international fraud investigation. They froze all my accounts, seized my computers, and they're saying something about money laundering and document forgery. Diana sat up in bed, her heart racing. What are you talking about? How could they? I don't know, but they keep asking about Emma Mitchell, about Moldova, about some passport scheme. Diana, they know about the plan. Across town, Rob stood in his office watching the news reports with grim satisfaction. The media was describing it as a major bust of an international document fraud ring that had been operating out of Denver's luxury hotel district. Trevor Walsh's name was prominently featured as the alleged ringleader. Luis Moreno sat across from Rob's desk, a thick file open in front of him. Your friend Marcus works fast. Emma's passport was recovered from a courier service Trevor had hired. The courier was very cooperative once Marcus's people explained the situation to him. Apparently, Trevor's been running a side business selling stolen American passports to the highest bidder. Emma was just going to be another transaction, and the federal investigation was already in progress. Trevor's hotel business was a front for moving money for some very unsavory international clients. A few phone calls to the right people, a little information about his current activities, and suddenly, Trevor's operation became a priority target. Sometimes, criminals make it easy to catch them. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad, the strangest thing happened. A man from the embassy showed up with my passport and said there was an emergency evacuation flight. I'm at the airport now. I'll be home tonight. What Emma didn't know was that Marcus Reed had contacts throughout Eastern Europe, and that her emergency evacuation had been arranged through channels that existed outside normal diplomatic procedures. Back at the Mitchell house, Diana was pacing the kitchen while Caroline watched the news with growing horror. They're calling Trevor a criminal mastermind, Caroline said, her voice shaking. They're saying he stole passports, laundered money for terrorist organizations, ran fake travel programs to kidnap Americans overseas. Diana, what if they connect us to this? Diana's phone rang again. This time it was her lawyer, Richard Coslow, a man she'd consulted secretly about divorce proceedings. Diana, I'm calling to inform you that I can no longer represent you. I've been contacted by federal authorities about certain conversations we've had regarding your husband's assets and your daughter's travel arrangements. I need you to find new counsel immediately. The line went dead. Diana stared at the phone, her perfect world beginning to crumble around her. That afternoon, Detective Sarah Quinn knocked on the Mitchell front door. She was a compact woman in her 30s with the kind of intense focus that came from years of working financial crimes. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Detective Quinn with the Denver Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Trevor Walsh and your daughter's recent travel to Moldova. Diana's hands shook as she led the detective into the living room, where Caroline was still watching the news coverage. I don't understand. Trevor is just a friend. I don't know anything about his business activities. Detective Quinn opened her notebook. Mrs. Mitchell, we have hotel records showing you met with Mr. Walsh over 30 times in the past year. We have bank records showing unusual financial activity in accounts connected to you, and we have recorded conversations discussing your daughter's travel arrangements and your husband's financial assets. Caroline spoke up, her voice high and nervous. Recorded conversations? That's impossible. We never... Mrs. Parker, Detective Quinn turned to Caroline. We're aware of your involvement as well. In fact, we have video evidence of you filming Emma Mitchell packing for her trip, which you then sent to Mr. Walsh's associates in Moldova. Diana felt the room spinning. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Mrs. Mitchell. But I should inform you that your husband has been very cooperative with our investigation. He's provided us with extensive documentation of what appears to be a conspiracy to defraud him and endanger his daughter. As Detective Quinn left, Diana turned to Caroline with wild eyes. Rob knows. Somehow he knows everything. Caroline was crying now. I told you this was too complicated. I told you we should have just divorced him normally and taken half. Half wasn't enough, Diana screamed. I deserve more than half. I deserve everything. That evening, Emma's flight landed at Denver International Airport. Rob was waiting at the gate, and when she ran into his arms, he held her tighter than he ever had before. Dad, I was so scared. Nothing made sense over there. The program was fake. My passport was missing. And then suddenly, this embassy guy shows up, and everything's fixed. Sometimes things work out when good people make sure they do, Rob said, stroking her hair. I'm just glad you're safe. As they walked through the airport, Emma chatted about her brief, terrifying adventure, but Rob's mind was elsewhere. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with updates from Luis and Marcus. Trevor was in federal custody, facing charges that would put him away for decades. Diana and Caroline were about to face their own legal problems, and the financial traps Rob had set were beginning to spring. The wire transfers Diana and Trevor had expected him to make had indeed been prepared, but they led to accounts that immediately triggered federal monitoring systems designed to catch money laundering. The asset liquidations they'd thought would destroy him were actually carefully structured to expose their own illegal activities. When they arrived home, the house was dark. Diana and Caroline were gone, along with several pieces of expensive jewelry and art that Diana had purchased over the past year. Rob found a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to stay with friends until this all blows over. D. Emma looked around the empty house with confusion. Where's Mom? Where's Aunt Caroline? Rob put his hands on his daughter's shoulders, looking into her eyes that held his own determination and strength. Emma, there are some things we need to talk about. Some things about your mother that you need to know. As he began to explain the truth about her trip, about the conspiracy, about the betrayal, Emma's expression changed from confusion to shock, to a cold anger that reminded Rob exactly whose daughter she was. She tried to have me kidnapped. Emma's voice was quiet, but it carried the same dangerous edge that Rob's had when he decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. She did, and she was going to use your danger to destroy everything I've built, everything I've worked for to give you a good life. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, she looked up at her father with steel in her eyes. What are we going to do about it? Rob smiled for the first time in weeks. His daughter was indeed his child. She didn't ask if they were going to fight back or whether they should forgive. She asked what they were going to do about it. "We're going to make sure she faces the consequences of every choice she's made," Rob said, "and we're going to make sure she never has the chance to hurt either of us again." As father and daughter sat in their kitchen making plans, neither of them knew that Diana was sitting in a cheap motel room across town, watching news reports about Trevor's arrest and realizing that her carefully planned new life had just turned into a nightmare. The game was just beginning. Diana stared at the stack of legal documents that had been served to her at the motel where she and Caroline had been hiding for 3 days. Federal conspiracy charges, state fraud charges, child endangerment charges. The list seemed endless. "How did this happen so fast?" Caroline whispered, her designer clothes wrinkled from sleeping in a cheap motel bed. 3 days ago, we were winning." Diana's phone buzzed with a call from her new lawyer, Amanda Foster, a public defender who specialized in criminal cases since no private attorney would take her case. "Diana, we need to talk. The evidence against you is extensive. They have recordings, financial records, witness testimony, and something called cooperative testimony from your husband. They're offering a plea deal, but it's not good." "What kind of deal?" 20 years minimum security if you testify against Trevor Walsh and provide information about the international passport ring. Diana's hands shook. 20 years for what? I never sold any passports. "No, but you conspired to steal one. You participated in an international fraud scheme. You engaged in child endangerment. And there's something else. The IRS is claiming you owe over $400,000 in taxes on income you never reported from your meetings with Trevor." After hanging up, Diana turned to Caroline with desperate eyes. "We have to talk to Rob. We have to make him understand that this was all Trevor's idea." Caroline was crying again. "Diana, I don't think Rob is the same man who left for work 4 days ago. I think we woke up something we shouldn't have." Across town, Rob sat in his office with Emma, Louise, and a new addition to their team, Catherine Walsh, Trevor's ex-wife, who had driven up from Colorado Springs the moment she heard about his arrest. Catherine was an elegant woman in her early 40s, with the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving a marriage to a manipulator. "Trevor destroyed my life systematically for 10 years, she told them. "He's a master manipulator who preys on women who think they deserve better than what they have. Diana isn't his first victim, and she wouldn't have been his last." Emma leaned forward, her eyes wide. "What do you mean, not his first victim?" "Trevor has done this before. 3 times that I know of. He finds married women with wealthy husbands, convinces them they're settling for less than they deserve, then creates elaborate schemes to help them destroy their husbands financially. He usually targets men who built their wealth from nothing because they're easier to make look like they're hiding assets." Louise opened a file. "Catherine's been helping us understand Trevor's pattern. He did this to a surgeon in Phoenix 2 years ago. The wife thought she was going to run away with Trevor and live in luxury, but after she helped him bankrupt her husband, Trevor disappeared with all the money and left her facing federal charges." Rob's expression was granite. "What happened to her?" "She's serving 15 years in federal prison. Her husband divorced her, kept custody of their kids, and rebuilt his practice. He's remarried now, happier than he's ever been." Emma stood up and walked to the window. "So Mom was just another mark. She thought she was special, but she was just another victim for Trevor to use and discard." Catherine nodded. "The pattern is always the same. Trevor makes them feel like they're criminal masterminds, like they're the smart ones who figured out how to beat the system. But really, they're just the fall guys. When everything collapses, Trevor has already moved his money offshore and has a new identity ready. Except this time, he didn't get away, Rob said with cold satisfaction. No, this time someone fought back before Trevor could complete his exit strategy. That afternoon, Rob's phone rang. Diana's name appeared on the screen. Rob, please, we need to talk. I know how this looks, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Diana. You conspired with a criminal to kidnap our daughter and steal everything I've worked for. You're not a victim. You're a co-conspirator. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Trevor said Emma would just be delayed for a few days, that she'd be safe, that you just have to pay some money. Diana, Emma was stranded in a war zone without documentation. Do you have any idea what could have happened to her? Do you understand that 18-year-old American girls disappear in places like that and are never seen again? There was silence on the other end of the line. I want to make a deal, Diana said finally. You have nothing I want. I have information about Trevor's other operations. I know about his offshore accounts, his real estate holdings, his other victims. I can help you make sure he never gets out of prison. Rob was quiet for a moment. Meet me at Rosenberg and Associates tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring Caroline, bring your lawyer, and Diana. Yes? If you try to run, if you try to hide assets, if you try to contact Trevor or any of his associates, I will make sure you face the maximum penalty for every charge they can bring against you. The only reason you're not in federal custody right now is because I asked them to wait. Don't make me regret that decision. The conversation ended with truths laid bare and the stakes clear, the web Trevor had spun coming undone thread by thread. The next day, the conference room at Rob's law office felt like a courtroom. Diana and Caroline sat on one side with Amanda Foster, while Rob, Emma, Luis, and Catherine sat on the other. Detective Quinn and an FBI agent named Paul Rodriguez observed from the side. Amanda Foster opened her briefcase. My clients are prepared to provide full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences and protective custody. Agent Rodriguez spoke first. Mr. Walsh has been very talkative since his arrest. He's provided us with details about his operations going back 5 years. He's also been very specific about your client's roles in this particular scheme. Diana went pale. What has he told you? He's told us that the plan to strand Emma Mitchell was entirely your idea. He says you approached him about eliminating both your husband and daughter so you could inherit everything without having to share it. Caroline gasped. That's not true. Diana never said anything about eliminating anyone. He's also told us that you, Miss Parker, were the one who stole Emma's passport from her luggage during the layover in Chicago. He has video evidence of you switching out her documents. The room went silent. Diana stared at her sister with horror. Caroline, you told me you didn't take the passport. You said Trevor's people took it in Moldova. Caroline was crying now. Diana, I'm sorry. Trevor said it was the only way. He said if we didn't help him, he'd make sure we both went to prison anyway. Emma stood up abruptly. I need some air. Rob followed his daughter into the hallway, where she was leaning against the wall with her fists clenched. Dad, I trusted her. When I was packing, Aunt Caroline was helping me. She was joking around, taking pictures, acting like she cared. And the whole time, she was planning to steal my passport and leave me stranded. Rob put his arm around Emma's shoulders. I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. It doesn't just hurt, Dad. It makes me angry. Really, really angry. When they returned to the conference room, Agent Rodriguez was explaining the terms of the cooperation agreement. Mrs. Mitchell, Miss Parker, in exchange for your complete testimony about Mr. Walsh's operations and your assistance in recovering assets he's hidden, the federal government is prepared to recommend sentences of 12 years for Mrs. Mitchell and 8 years for Ms. Parker. Diana's lawyer started to speak, but Rob held up his hand. That's the federal recommendation, but I haven't decided whether to press state charges for child endangerment, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Those charges would run consecutive to the federal sentences. Diana looked at him with desperation. Rob, please, I made a mistake. I was foolish. I was selfish, but I never wanted Emma to actually get hurt. Emma stepped forward, her voice unwavering. You filmed me packing. You watched me get excited about this trip. You hugged me goodbye at the door. And you knew. You knew that I was walking into a trap that could have gotten me killed. Emma, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Emma said, her voice carrying the same cold authority as her father's. You were willing to sacrifice me for money. You were willing to let me disappear in a foreign country so you could steal from Dad. Rob looked at Diana with the expression he usually reserved for criminals he was about to destroy in court. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide complete cooperation with all investigations. You're going to surrender any assets you've hidden. You're going to serve whatever sentence the court gives you, and when you get out, you're going to stay away from Emma and me for the rest of your life. And if I don't, then I'll make sure you face every charge possible, federal and state, and I'll use every resource I have to make sure you serve the maximum sentence in the worst possible conditions. Diana stared at him, finally understanding that the man she'd married, the man she'd thought she could manipulate and destroy, was someone she'd never really known at all. You've changed, Rob. You're not the man I married. Rob's smile was ice cold. You're right. The man you married would have tried to forgive you, would have tried to work things out, would have put family first. But that man died when I heard you laughing about our daughter's terror. What you're dealing with now is someone who learned a long time ago that the world is full of predators. And the only way to deal with predators is to be a bigger predator. As Diana and Caroline were led away by federal marshals, Rob and Emma stood together in the parking lot. Is it over, Dad? Not yet, sweetheart, but we're going to make sure it ends the right way. Emma nodded, her jaw set with determination. What's next? Rob looked at his daughter, brilliant, strong, and now educated in the harsh realities of the world, and felt proud of who she was becoming. Next, we make sure Trevor Walsh never hurts another family. Trevor Walsh sat in his federal holding cell, confident that his cooperation with the FBI would earn him a reduced sentence and eventual freedom. He'd played this game before, and he knew the system well enough to navigate it. What he didn't know was that Rob Mitchell had spent the past week systematically destroying every escape route Trevor had ever created. Marcus Reed sat across from Rob in a private booth at an upscale steakhouse, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Your boy Trevor's been busy. 12 offshore accounts, properties in 6 countries, and a network of forged identities going back a decade. But here's the interesting part. He's been skimming from his own clients. Rob opened the envelope, studying photographs and financial documents. What kind of clients? The kind that don't like being stolen from. Arms dealers, human traffickers, drug cartels. Trevor's been using their money to fund his little romance scams, thinking they'd never find out. But people talk in prison, and some of Trevor's former business partners were getting very interested in where their money went. Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching international law. Dad, Trevor's cooperation deal requires him to give testimony about his offshore accounts. If he admits to having them, Won't that expose his theft from these other criminals? Rob smiled grimly. That's exactly what it will do. Meanwhile, Diana was learning that federal prison wasn't like the minimum security facilities she'd imagined. Her cellmate was a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who'd been convicted of running a multi-million-dollar identity theft ring and who had very specific opinions about women who endangered children. So, you helped some man kidnap your own daughter? Rosa asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone who'd grown up on streets where family loyalty was everything. It wasn't kidnapping. It was just, I never thought she'd really be in danger. Rosa's laugh was harsh. Lady, I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but I never once did anything that would put my kids at risk. You know what happens to people like you in here? Diana was about to find out. Word spread quickly through the women's facility that one of the new inmates had betrayed her own child for money. Women who'd fought gang wars, who'd committed every crime imaginable, still had one unbreakable rule. You protect children, especially your own. By the end of her first week, Diana had been attacked twice, had her commissary account drained by other inmates, and had been informed by the guards that she was being moved to protective custody for her own safety. Caroline's experience in the minimum security facility was different, but equally devastating. The other white-collar criminals she was housed with included several women who'd been victims of financial predators like Trevor. When they learned that Caroline had helped target a fellow mother's daughter, they made her life systematically miserable in ways that guards couldn't prevent or punish. Back in Denver, Rob received a call from Agent Rodriguez. Mitchell, we have a problem. Walsh is refusing to cooperate unless we guarantee him witness protection and relocation after his sentence. What's he afraid of? Apparently, word has gotten out about his cooperation deal. Some of his former clients have put a bounty on him. He's claiming he needs protection to testify. Rob's expression was predatory. Agent Rodriguez, I may have a solution to your problem. I'm listening. What if Trevor Walsh decided that cooperation wasn't in his best interest after all? What if he withdrew his plea deal and decided to take his chances at trial? That would be a disaster for our case. We need his testimony to prosecute the international conspiracy. No, you need his information. His testimony is just one way to get it. 2 days later, Trevor received a visit from his lawyer, who brought disturbing news. Trevor, someone's been distributing information about your cooperation agreement. The word is out that you're testifying against international crime organizations. My sources in the federal system say there have been inquiries about your location from some very dangerous people. Trevor went pale. What kind of inquiries? The kind that suggest your former business partners want to have a conversation with you about some missing money. I need to withdraw my cooperation agreement. I need to go back to fighting the charges. Trevor, if you do that, you're looking at life in prison. The evidence against you is overwhelming. I'd rather spend life in prison than spend 5 minutes in general population with people who want me dead. What Trevor didn't know was that his lawyer, David Chun, had been approached by Rob Mitchell 3 days earlier. Chun was a good attorney, but he was also a practical man who understood that sometimes the interests of justice were served by letting criminals destroy each other. The conversation had been simple. Mr. Chun, your client is going to withdraw his cooperation agreement and fight the charges. I'm going to make sure that when he does, he faces every possible charge with the harshest possible penalties. In return, when this is all over, I'll remember that you were helpful during a difficult time. Chun understood the implicit threat and the implicit promise. He was being offered the choice to be on the winning side or the losing side. When Trevor withdrew his cooperation agreement, the federal prosecutors were furious, but they had enough evidence to proceed without him. More importantly, they now had no obligation to protect him. Emma sat in her father's office, watching news coverage of Trevor's legal maneuvering. "Dad, won't this make it harder to convict him?" "No, sweetheart. It will make it harder for him to survive his conviction." "What do you mean?" "Trevor Walsh has been stealing from some very dangerous people for years. The only thing keeping him alive was his cooperation deal with the FBI. Now that he's withdrawn that cooperation, he's just another federal prisoner who owes money to people who don't forgive debts." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Are you saying he's going to be killed in prison?" "I'm saying that people who betray their families, who endanger children, who build their lives on destroying others, eventually face consequences for their choices. Sometimes those consequences come from the legal system. Sometimes they come from other sources. And you're okay with that?" Rob looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who'd learned that the world was not a place where good intentions mattered as much as results. "Emma, your mother and Trevor Walsh were willing to see you disappear forever for money. They were willing to let you be trafficked, murdered, or worse, as long as it served their purposes. I'm not going to lose sleep over whatever happens to them as a result of their own choices." Emma nodded slowly. She was 18, brilliant, and rapidly learning that the adult world was far more complex and dangerous than she'd ever imagined. But she was also her father's daughter, and she understood justice in ways that textbooks couldn't teach. 3 weeks later, Trevor Walsh was found dead in his federal holding cell. The official cause of death was ruled suicide. He had apparently hanged himself with bedsheets after receiving a letter that detailed exactly how his former clients planned to collect their debts. The letter was never found, and the investigation concluded that Trevor had taken his own life rather than face the prospect of spending decades in prison, knowing that powerful enemies wanted him dead. Rob received the news while having dinner with Emma at their favorite restaurant. He showed her the headline on his phone without emotion. "Is it wrong that I don't feel bad about this?" Emma asked. "It would be wrong if you celebrated it. But feeling relief that someone who wanted to destroy our family can't hurt anyone else, that's not wrong. That's survival instinct." Emma looked at her father with newfound respect and understanding. "You planned this, didn't you? You made sure he couldn't cooperate, knowing what would happen." Rob met his daughter's eyes without flinching. "I made sure that a man who built his life destroying families faced the natural consequences of the choices he made. The world is full of predators, Emma. The only way to protect the people you love is to make sure predators understand that targeting your family is the last mistake they'll ever make." "And what about Mom and Aunt Caroline?" "They made their choices too. They'll serve their time, and when they get out, they'll have to live with the knowledge that they destroyed their own family for money they never got to spend." Emma nodded, understanding that her father had taught her a lesson that no school could provide. In a world where people would hurt children for profit, mercy was a luxury that could get you hurt. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart. And I will never let anyone hurt you again." As they walked to their car, Emma realized that her father had shown her something important. Sometimes, protecting the people you love requires becoming someone others might fear. And sometimes, that was exactly who you needed to be. 6 months after Trevor Walsh's death, Diana Mitchell sat in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Alderson, West Virginia, staring across the table at Emma. It was their first face-to-face conversation since the day Emma had left for Moldova. Emma had driven 8 hours from Stanford University, where she was excelling in her pre-law studies, to have this conversation. She looked older than her 18 years, with the kind of composure that came from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. "You look good," Diana said, her voice trembling. Prison had aged her dramatically. Her blonde hair was now streaked with gray roots, and the expensive skin treatments that had kept her looking young were a distant memory. "Thank you," Emma replied politely. "How are you adjusting to this?" Diana gestured around the visiting room with bitter irony. "How do you think? I went from a $2.8 million house to sharing a cell with a woman who killed her drug dealer boyfriend. I went from country club lunches to commissary food and lockdown drills." Emma's expression remained neutral. "That must be difficult." "Emma, you have to understand. I never wanted you to get hurt. I thought Trevor had everything planned out perfectly. I thought you'd just be delayed for a few days, maybe scared a little, and then everything would work out." "Work out how, exactly?" Emma's voice carried a hint of her father's steel. "Work out with me stranded in a war zone while you and Trevor stole everything Dad had built?" Diana's composure cracked. "We weren't stealing. We were taking what I deserved. Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to a man who thinks he's better than you because he grew up poor and had to work for everything? Your father made me feel small every day of our marriage." Emma leaned forward. "Dad never made you feel small, Mom. He made you feel like you had to work for things instead of just taking them. There's a difference. You don't understand. You've always been Daddy's little girl. You never saw how he looked at me like I was just some pretty accessory he'd acquired along with his success. Is that why you were willing to sacrifice me? Because you felt underappreciated?" Diana was crying now. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Trevor said he had people in Moldova who would make sure you were safe, who would just hold on to your passport for a few days while your father liquidated some assets. You were never supposed to be in real danger." Emma's laugh was cold, eerily reminiscent of her father's. "Mom, do you understand what Moldova is like right now? Do you know what happens to young American women who disappear in countries like that? I could have been trafficked, murdered, or worse, and you thought that was an acceptable risk for money. You thought wrong about everything." Emma stood up. "I came here to see if there was anything left of the mother I used to love, if there was any part of you that regretted what you did to your own daughter." Diana looked up with desperate hope. "Emma, I do regret it. I regret everything. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your mother. We can rebuild our relationship. When you get out in 10 years, I'll be 28 years old. I'll probably be married, maybe have children of my own, and I will never, ever let you near my family." Diana's face went white. "You can't mean that." "I mean it completely. You violated the most fundamental trust that exists, the trust between a mother and child. You chose money over my safety, your greed over my life. There's no coming back from that." Emma gathered her purse and stood to leave, then paused and looked back at her mother one last time. "You know what the saddest part is? Dad would have given you anything you wanted if you just asked. He loved you enough to trust you with his daughter's life, with his life's work, with everything he cared about. And you threw it all away for a fantasy of easy money with a criminal who saw you as nothing more than another mark." As Emma walked toward the exit, Diana called after her. "Emma, please, I'm your mother." Emma stopped and turned around, her expression showing a mixture of sadness and finality. "No, you're not. My mother died the day she decided I was expendable." Meanwhile, Caroline Parker was discovering that minimum security prison was its own kind of hell. Unlike Diana, who was dealing with violent criminals who had their own twisted code of honor, Caroline was surrounded by white-collar criminals who understood exactly what she'd done and found it personally offensive. Her cellmate, Patricia Vance, was a former financial advisor who'd been convicted of embezzling from elderly clients. Even she was disgusted by Caroline's role in the conspiracy. "At least I stole from strangers," Patricia said one evening as they prepared for lights out. "You helped destroy your own family, your own niece. What kind of person does that?" Caroline had been asking herself the same question for months. The answer was becoming increasingly clear. The kind of person who'd always lived in her sister's shadow, who'd always felt like she deserved more than she'd earned, who'd been willing to do anything to finally be the important one in someone's plan. She'd received one letter from Diana since they'd been incarcerated, full of self-pity and blame for everyone except themselves. Caroline had thrown it away without finishing it. She was beginning to understand that her sister had used her just as ruthlessly as Trevor had used them both. Back in Denver, Rob was building a new life with Emma. He'd sold the house where Diana had betrayed their family and bought a smaller, more secure home in a neighborhood where his legal reputation ensured their privacy. Emma split her time between Stanford and Denver, excelling in her studies while also learning practical lessons about law, justice, and survival that no classroom could provide. Luis Moreno had become something more than an investigator for Rob. He'd become a trusted advisor who helped Rob understand the ongoing threats to their security. Some of Trevor's former associates were still unaccounted for, and some of Diana's family members had made noises about appealing her conviction. "Your ex-wife's mother has been calling reporters," Luis reported during one of their weekly meetings. "She's claiming Diana was coerced by Trevor, that she's really a victim who was manipulated into betraying her family." Rob's expression darkened. "Eleanor has always enabled Diana's worst impulses. What's she hoping to accomplish?" "Probably trying to build public sympathy for an appeal. Maybe hoping to pressure you into providing a character reference for Diana's sentencing hearing." "That's not going to happen," Rob said firmly. Emma looked up from her law books. "Actually, Dad, maybe it should." Rob and Luis both stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you should testify at Mom's sentencing hearing. Not to help her, but to make sure the judge understands exactly what she did and why she deserves the maximum sentence." Rob considered this. "You want me to make a victim impact statement? I want you to make sure everyone understands that this wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, long-term conspiracy to destroy our family. The court needs to hear that from you." 3 weeks later, Rob stood in a federal courtroom and delivered a victim impact statement that left the gallery silent and the defendant in tears. "Your Honor, Diana Mitchell didn't just commit fraud or conspiracy. She committed the ultimate betrayal of the sacred trust between parent and child. She looked at our 18-year-old daughter and decided that her life was an acceptable risk for financial gain. She collaborated with a career criminal to abandon Emma in a dangerous foreign country without documentation, knowing that young American women disappear in such places and are never seen again." Rob's voice was steady, controlled, but carried an undercurrent of barely contained fury. "Emma is alive today, not because of anything her mother did to protect her, but despite everything her mother did to put her in danger. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse, no real understanding of the magnitude of her betrayal, and no recognition that she destroyed her own family for money she never even received." He turned to look directly at Diana, who was crying silently at the defendant's table. "I ask this court to consider not just the financial crimes Diana committed, but the fundamental violation of human trust This is a woman who was willing to sacrifice her own child for profit. If she's capable of that, she's capable of anything. The judge sentenced Diana to the maximum recommended term, 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving at least 10 years. Caroline received 8 years, also with no early parole. As they left the courthouse, Emma walked beside her father with quiet satisfaction. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they really did?" she asked. "I don't think they're capable of understanding," Rob replied. "They'll spend their prison time feeling sorry for themselves and blaming everyone else for their choices. Understanding that requires a level of self-awareness they've never shown. And what about us? What do we do now?" Rob put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Now we live well. We build something good. We make sure that what they tried to destroy becomes stronger than it ever was before." Emma smiled. "I like that plan." As they drove home, both father and daughter understood that they'd learned lessons about trust, betrayal, and survival that would serve them for the rest of their lives. They discovered that family wasn't just about blood relations. It was about people who would protect each other, no matter what. They'd also learned that some betrayals were unforgivable, and that mercy given to people who would destroy children was just another form of enabling evil. Most importantly, they'd learned that when predators target your family, the only appropriate response is to make sure they never get the chance to target anyone else. Rob Mitchell had kept his promise. He'd never forgiven, never forgotten, and never allowed the people who betrayed his family to escape the consequences of their choices. And Emma Mitchell had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires becoming someone others might fear. It was a lesson she would carry with her into law school, into her career, and into the family she would someday build. A family that would never be vulnerable to predators, because they would know how to recognize them, how to fight them, and how to stop them when necessary. 2 years after the sentencing, Rob Mitchell stood in his new law office, looking out at the Denver skyline. His practice had evolved since the betrayal. He now specialized in cases involving family fraud, parental kidnapping, and crimes against children. Word had spread through legal circles that Rob Mitchell was the lawyer you called when someone had targeted your family, and the system wasn't moving fast enough. Emma was in her junior year at Stanford, double majoring in law and international relations. She called every Sunday, and their conversations had evolved from father comforting daughter to two legal minds discussing strategy and justice. "Dad, I've been thinking about writing my senior thesis on international parental abduction cases," Emma said during their latest call, specifically about how domestic criminals use foreign jurisdictions to terrorize families. "That's a good topic. What's your thesis?" "That the current legal framework is inadequate because it assumes good faith from all parties. It doesn't account for cases where one parent is working with international criminals to permanently eliminate the other parent and children." Rob smiled with pride. His daughter had inherited his analytical mind and his understanding that the world was full of predators who counted on their victims being naive about their methods. "Have you considered including your own case in the research?" "Actually, yes, but not as a victim story. As a case study in how families can fight back when traditional law enforcement isn't enough." That afternoon, Rob received an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Quinn knocked on his office door, carrying a thick file. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to update you on something we've discovered about Trevor Walsh's network." Rob gestured for her to sit down. "I thought that case was closed when Trevor died." "The Trevor Walsh case is closed, but his network was bigger than we realized. We've been tracking his associates for the past 2 years, and we've uncovered something disturbing. Detective Quinn opened her file and spread out photographs and documents. Trevor wasn't just running romance scams. He was part of an international ring that specialized in what they called family dissolution services. They would target wealthy families, corrupt one family member, create a crisis that forced the family to liquidate assets, then disappear with the money while leaving the corrupted family member to face the legal consequences. Rob studied the documents with growing anger. How many families? At least 17 over the past 5 years. Successful businessmen, doctors, lawyers, all targeted through their wives or adult children. The pattern was always the same. Create a fake crisis involving travel, force rapid liquidation of assets, then vanish while the corrupted family member faced fraud charges. And let me guess, Trevor's associates are still operating. 3 of them working out of Miami now, targeting families in Florida and the Caribbean. The FBI wants to take them down, but they need someone who understands the pattern. Someone who's seen it from the victim's perspective. Rob leaned back in his chair. You want me to help? I want you to consult on the investigation. Your experience with Trevor's methods, your understanding of how they manipulate family members. It could be invaluable. That evening, Rob called Emma to discuss the opportunity. Dad, you have to do it. How many other families are going to be destroyed if these people aren't stopped? It would mean traveling, possibly putting myself in dangerous situations. It would mean leaving you more exposed. Emma's laugh was strong and confident. Dad, I'm not the scared 18-year-old who got trapped in Moldova anymore. I'm a 20-year-old woman who spent 2 years learning how to recognize predators and defend myself. Plus, I'll be surrounded by federal agents and campus security. I think I can handle it. And you think I should help hunt down the rest of Trevor's network? I think you should make sure no other daughter goes through what I went through. I think you should make sure no other father has to choose between his life's work and his child's safety. 3 weeks later, Rob found himself in Miami, working with a joint FBI task force that had been tracking the remnants of Trevor's organization. The 3 remaining members of the network were Marcus Vale, Trevor's former money manager, Rebecca Santos, a woman who specialized in corrupting wives and daughters, and David Kim, who handled the international logistics of moving money and people. The FBI had developed intelligence that the trio was planning their biggest operation yet, targeting the family of a prominent Miami surgeon whose wife had gambling debts and whose college-age son had been recruited by Rebecca Santos. Agent Rodriguez, who had worked the original Trevor Walsh case, briefed Rob on the current operation. Dr. Anthony Rivera is a cardiac surgeon with assets worth about $8 million. His wife, Maria, has accumulated gambling debts of around $200,000 that she's hidden from her husband. Their son, Miguel, is a junior at the University of Miami who's been dating Rebecca Santos for 3 months, though he knows her as Sofia Martinez, a graduate student in international business. Rob studied the family photos. What's the crisis scenario? Miguel is supposed to take a trip to Costa Rica for a research project that Rebecca has arranged. Once he's there, his passport will disappear, and he'll be arrested on drug charges that Rebecca's associates will arrange. Maria will then approach her husband about liquidating assets to pay for Miguel's legal defense and rescue. And the real plan: Miguel disappears permanently. Maria faces fraud charges for the asset liquidation. Dr. Rivera loses everything and probably his medical license. Rebecca, Marcus, and David split the money and move on to the next family. Rob felt his anger building. How long do we have? Miguel is supposed to leave for Costa Rica in 5 days. Then we need to move fast. The operation required careful coordination. The FBI couldn't simply arrest the trio without solid evidence of their current crimes, and they couldn't warn the Rivera family without potentially spooking the criminals into disappearing again. Rob's role was to approach Dr. Rivera and explain the situation in a way that would gain his cooperation without alerting his wife or son that they were under surveillance. The meeting took place in Dr. Rivera's office at Miami General Hospital. Anthony Rivera was a man in his early 50s with the kind of precise, controlled demeanor that came from spending years making life and death decisions. "Dr. Rivera, I'm going to tell you something that will be difficult to hear, but I need you to understand that your family is in immediate danger." Rob explained the conspiracy methodically, showing Dr. Rivera the evidence of his wife's gambling debts, his son's relationship with a known criminal, and the planned research trip that was actually a kidnapping scheme. Dr. Rivera listened with growing horror and anger. "You're telling me my wife has been lying to me for months, and my son is dating a woman who plans to have him murdered? I'm telling you that your family has been targeted by professional criminals who have done this to 17 other families. The good news is that we can stop them. The bad news is that it will require you to make some very difficult choices about your wife and son." "What kind of choices?" "Your wife will have to confess her gambling addiction and her role in this conspiracy. Your son will have to cooperate with federal agents to gather evidence against Rebecca Santos, and you'll have to be prepared for the possibility that your family may never be the same after this." Dr. Rivera was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Mitchell, if I don't cooperate, what happens to Miguel?" "He disappears in Costa Rica and is never seen again. And if I do cooperate, your son lives, the criminals go to prison, and your family has a chance to rebuild based on truth instead of lies. That's not really a choice, is it?" "No, it's not." The next 4 days were a careful orchestration of surveillance, wire recordings, and controlled interactions. Miguel Rivera, once he understood that his girlfriend was actually a criminal planning his murder, agreed to wear recording devices during his meetings with Rebecca Santos. Maria Rivera, faced with evidence of her gambling addiction and the threat to her son's life, broke down and confessed everything to federal agents. The recordings Miguel obtained were devastating. Rebecca Santos, thinking she was talking to a naive college student, detailed the entire plan, including Miguel's planned murder, the false drug charges, and how his parents would be manipulated into liquidating their assets. On the 5th day, as Miguel was supposed to board his flight to Costa Rica, federal agents instead arrested Rebecca Santos, Marcus Vale, and David Kim in coordinated raids across Miami. The evidence recovered from their computers and communications revealed the full scope of their operations. Not just the 17 families Rob had been told about, but 23 families across the United States, Mexico, and Central America. The network had been responsible for at least 12 murders, including several children who had been eliminated when their parents couldn't or wouldn't liquidate sufficient assets. Rob stood in the FBI field office, watching as the 3 criminals were processed for booking. Agent Rodriguez joined him at the observation window. "You did good work, Mitchell. These 3 would have destroyed the Rivera family and moved on to the next target. Now they'll spend the rest of their lives in federal prison." "How many other networks like this are operating?" "We don't know. But we've learned something important from this operation. Having someone who survived this kind of attack, someone who understands how they think and operate, makes all the difference in stopping them." That evening, Rob called Emma from his hotel room to update her on the arrests. "Dad, I'm proud of you. You turned what happened to our family into something that protected other families." "We turned it into something protective, sweetheart," This was always about making sure other people don't go through what we went through. Have you heard from Mom or Aunt Caroline lately? Rob's expression hardened. No, and I don't expect to. They made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences. They chose to betray our family for money and greed, and they'll spend the rest of their lives paying for it. They're not part of our lives anymore, and I don't want them to be. They don't deserve to be. Your Aunt Caroline sent a letter last month asking for money for commissary expenses. I threw it away without reading the whole thing. And your mother, she writes occasionally. The letters are always the same. Self-pity, blame for everyone else. Claims that she's found faith or therapy, or found some other excuse for what she did. I don't read them anymore. Emma was quiet for a moment. Do you think they'll ever understand what they really did? I think they'll spend the rest of their lives believing they were victims of circumstances beyond their control. I think they'll die in prison still believing that, somehow, this was all someone else's fault. And you're okay with that? Emma, I learned something important during this operation. There are people in the world who see families like ours as resources to be harvested. They look at our love for each other, our willingness to sacrifice for one another, and they see weakness to be exploited. Your mother and aunt chose to become those people. So, what do we do now? Now, we keep building the life they tried to destroy. We use what we've learned to protect other families, and we never, ever forget that the price of having something worth protecting is being willing to destroy anyone who tries to take it from you. Emma was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a voice that carried the same steel as her father's. I love you, Dad, and I'm proud to be your daughter. I love you too, sweetheart. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start planning your future in law school, and I have a feeling you're going to change the world. As Rob hung up the phone, he reflected on how completely his life had changed since that morning when Diana had laughed about Emma's terror. He'd lost a wife and sister-in-law who'd proven themselves to be enemies of his family. But he'd gained something more valuable: the absolute certainty that he and Emma could survive anything the world threw at them, because they understood what most people never learned. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires becoming someone others fear, and sometimes that was exactly who you needed to be. 3 years had passed since the Miami operation, and Rob Mitchell's reputation had evolved beyond Denver's legal circles. He was now consulted by law enforcement agencies across the country on cases involving sophisticated family fraud. His practice had become something unique: part law firm, part consulting group, part guardian agency for families under siege. Emma was finishing her final year at Stanford Law School at the top of her class and already being recruited by federal prosecutor offices and prestigious firms. But more importantly, she'd spent her summers working with her father, learning the practical aspects of hunting predators who targeted families. On a cold March morning, Rob received a call that would test everything they'd learned. Mr. Mitchell, this is Detective Lisa Park with the Seattle Police Department. We have a situation here that matches the pattern you've helped us understand. A family, the Hendersons, father, mother, and 2 teenage daughters. The mother has disappeared with both girls, supposedly on a mother-daughter trip to Thailand. But Thailand isn't allowing American tourists right now due to political unrest. Rob put down his coffee. How long have they been gone? 6 days. The father, James Henderson, is frantic. He's a software executive worth about $15 million. We found evidence that his wife, Linda, had been meeting with a man who matches the description of Marcus Vale. Detective Park, Marcus Vale is in federal prison. He was sentenced to life without parole. I know, but someone matching his description and using his methods has been operating in the Pacific Northwest. We think we're dealing with a new network that's using the same playbook. Within hours, Rob was on a plane to Seattle, and Emma had received emergency permission to join the investigation as part of her senior practicum in criminal law. James Henderson was a 48-year-old man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. He sat in his empty $3.2 million home in Bellevue, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a life that might be ending. Mr. Mitchell, I don't understand any of this. Linda seemed happy. The girls were excited about the trip. Everything seemed normal until they just vanished. Rob studied the documentation Detective Park had provided. Mr. Henderson, when did your wife first mention this trip to Thailand? About 2 months ago. She said she'd found a special program for mothers and daughters, some kind of cultural immersion experience. She was so excited about it, and the girls were thrilled. I thought it was wonderful that they were bonding. Emma looked up from her laptop. Dad, I'm not finding any legitimate cultural programs for Americans in Thailand right now. In fact, the State Department is actively discouraging any non-essential travel to Southeast Asia. Mr. Henderson, Rob continued, we need to examine your wife's financial activities, her communications, her travel patterns over the past few months, and I need to prepare you for the possibility that your wife wasn't a victim of this conspiracy. She might have been a participant. James Henderson's face went white. That's impossible. Linda would never hurt our daughters. They're her whole world. Rob and Emma exchanged glances. They'd heard those exact words from Dr. Rivera, from Rob's own experience, from every family they'd helped. The hardest lesson for victims to learn was that the person they trusted most might be the person betraying them. The investigation revealed a pattern that was both familiar and terrifying. Linda Henderson had indeed been meeting with a man who called himself Michael Vance, who matched Marcus Vale's physical description and methods. She'd been gradually moving money from family accounts to offshore holdings. She'd been researching her husband's business assets and their daughter's educational trust funds. But this case had a twist that chilled Rob to his core. Detective Park, Emma said, looking up from the financial records they'd obtained. Linda Henderson didn't just liquidate money. She liquidated the girls' college funds, their trust accounts, even their health insurance policies. She cleaned out everything connected to their daughters. Rob felt his blood run cold. What are you saying? I'm saying this wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. This was a complete erasure. Linda Henderson took everything connected to her daughters and converted it to cash before disappearing with them. Detective Park joined them at the conference table in the Henderson home. We've been tracking the money trail. Linda converted approximately $2.8 million to cryptocurrency and transferred it to accounts we can't trace. But here's the disturbing part. She also took out life insurance policies on both daughters just 3 weeks before they left. The room went silent. Rob had seen many forms of family betrayal, but this suggested something beyond fraud or abandonment. Detective, Rob said carefully, are we talking about a murder for insurance scheme? We don't know yet, but teenage American girls who disappear in Southeast Asia, the statistics aren't good. Emma stood up abruptly. We need to find them now. Over the next 48 hours, Rob coordinated with international law enforcement, while Emma used her growing network of legal and academic contacts to track digital footprints. What they discovered was a sophisticated operation that went far beyond anything Trevor Walsh's network had attempted. Michael Vance was actually Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative who transitioned to family destruction as a private business. His network specialized in what they called total family liquidation, corrupting one family member to eliminate all other family members while transferring all assets to offshore accounts. Linda Henderson hadn't just been seduced by promises of easy money. She'd been systematically brainwashed over months of psychological manipulation, convinced that her husband was planning to divorce her and take custody of their daughters, that her only option was to strike first. The breakthrough came when Emma discovered that Victor's network used a specific encrypted communication app that left traces in metadata. Working with FBI cybercrime specialists, they tracked the communications to a compound outside Bangkok. "Mr. Henderson," Rob said, calling James with the update. "We found them. Your wife and daughters are being held at a facility in Thailand. But James, you need to understand. This isn't a rescue mission anymore. This is a recovery mission." "What do you mean?" "I mean, your wife may no longer be psychologically capable of recognizing that she's put your daughters in danger. She may actively resist rescue attempts because she's been convinced that you're the threat." The international operation required coordination between the FBI, Thai authorities, and private security contractors that Rob had worked with on previous cases. Marcus Reed, Rob's contact for situations that required extra-legal solutions, flew to Bangkok with a team of specialists. The compound raid was swift and professional. They found Linda Henderson and her daughters in what appeared to be a comfortable living situation, until they realized that the girls were being kept drugged and compliant, while Linda was being systematically reprogrammed to see their eventual elimination as a mercy killing. Viktor Petrov was captured along with documentation of similar operations across 12 countries. The evidence suggested that his network had been responsible for the disappearances of over 40 families in the past 3 years. But the psychological damage to the Henderson family was devastating. Linda Henderson, when confronted with the reality of what she'd done, suffered a complete mental breakdown. The combination of months of psychological manipulation and the horror of realizing she'd nearly caused her daughter's deaths left her in a catatonic state that would require years of psychiatric treatment. The two Henderson daughters, Sarah, 16, and Michelle, 14, had been kept in a drug-induced fog for weeks, but were physically unharmed. However, they'd heard enough conversations to understand that their mother had planned their deaths for money. Rob and Emma flew back to Seattle with the Henderson family, watching James struggle to comfort daughters who were terrified of their own mother and to cope with a wife who might never recover her sanity. "How do we move forward from this?" James asked Rob during the flight home. "How do I explain to my daughters that their mother was going to have them killed? How do I help them trust anyone ever again?" Emma answered before Rob could speak. "You start by showing them that some people fight for families instead of destroying them. You show them that there are people in the world who will risk everything to protect children. And you teach them to recognize predators so they're never vulnerable again." James looked at Emma with something approaching awe. "How old are you?" 21. "And I learned these lessons because my own mother tried to have me kidnapped and murdered for money. And how are you? How are you so strong?" Emma glanced at her father. "Because I had someone who fought for me instead of abandoning me. Because I learned that the world is full of people who will hurt children for profit. But it's also full of people who will destroy those predators to protect families." When they landed in Seattle, Rob and Emma helped the Henderson family transition into a new reality. James would need to rebuild his relationship with his daughters while his wife underwent psychiatric treatment in a secure facility. The girls would need extensive therapy to process their trauma and their mother's betrayal. But they would survive because they'd learned the same lesson Emma had learned. When predators target your family, you don't negotiate, you don't forgive, you don't try to understand their motivations. You destroy them completely. That evening, Rob and Emma sat in their hotel room debriefing the case. "Dad, how many more networks like this are operating?" "Too many. But Emma, we're not just fighting individual criminals anymore. We're building something larger, a network of families who've survived these attacks and who are committed to protecting other families." "What do you mean?" "I mean, James Henderson is going to spend the rest of his life making sure no other father loses his family to predators. Dr. Rivera is funding international operations to hunt down these networks. Every family we save becomes part of a larger force that's dedicated to destroying people who target children." Emma nodded with understanding. "We're not just practicing law anymore. We're waging war. We're protecting civilization." "Exactly," Rob corrected. "Because at its core, civilization is about protecting families, protecting children, ensuring that love and trust aren't just weaknesses to be exploited." "And what about the people who choose to become predators?" Rob's expression was granite. "They get exactly what they deserve." As they prepared for sleep, Emma reflected on how completely her worldview had evolved since that morning when she'd kissed her father goodbye and climbed into a taxi for what was supposed to be a cultural exchange trip. She'd learned that the world was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined, but also that there were people willing to fight those dangers. Most importantly, she learned that sometimes protecting innocence required becoming someone capable of great violence, and that mercy shown to people who would destroy families was just another form of cruelty to their victims. Tomorrow, they would fly home to Denver and begin planning their next case. Because in a world full of predators, the work of protecting families never ended. 5 years after the Seattle operation, Emma Mitchell stood before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, being confirmed as the youngest federal prosecutor in the Department of Justice's Specialized Crimes Against Families Unit, a division that had been created largely due to the cases she and her father had developed. At 26, Emma had prosecuted more family destruction networks than any attorney in American history. Her success rate was perfect. Every predator she'd hunted had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "Ms. Mitchell," Senator Patricia Williams asked during the confirmation hearing, "some critics have argued that your prosecutorial methods are unusually aggressive, that you show no mercy to defendants who claim they were manipulated into betraying their own families. How do you respond to those criticisms?" Emma's voice was steady and controlled. "Senator Williams, in the past 5 years, our unit has prevented the murders of 127 children and the destruction of 89 families. We've recovered over $340 million in stolen assets and dismantled international networks that were treating American families as resources to be harvested. I don't show mercy to people who would murder children for profit, because mercy to predators is cruelty to their victims. But what about rehabilitation? What about the possibility that some of these defendants could be reformed?" Emma's expression didn't change. "Senator, my mother tried to have me murdered when I was 18 years old. She thought I was an acceptable casualty in her plan to steal my father's life's work. Should I have shown her mercy? Should I have prioritized her rehabilitation over the safety of other children?" The room was silent. Everyone on the committee knew Emma's story, but hearing her reference it so directly was still startling. "What I learned from my mother's betrayal is that people who are willing to sacrifice children for money have crossed a line that civilized society cannot tolerate. They've demonstrated that they view children as expendable resources rather than human beings deserving of protection. Once someone makes that choice, they forfeit their right to participate in civilized society Senator Williams pressed further. Ms. Mitchell, don't you think your personal experience might make you biased in these cases? Emma's smile was ice cold. Senator, my personal experience makes me uniquely qualified to recognize predators and understand their methods. Every prosecutor brings their life experience to their work. My experience happens to include surviving the kind of crimes I now prosecute. The confirmation vote was unanimous. That evening, Emma sat with her father in his Denver office, which had evolved into the headquarters of what was now called the Family Protection Network, a cooperation between federal law enforcement, private security firms, and families who'd survived predatory attacks. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, Rob said, raising his glass of whiskey in a toast. Federal prosecutor at 26, and you're going to head the most important unit in the Justice Department. I couldn't have done it without learning from the best, Emma replied, clinking her glass against his. Dad, I have something to tell you about Mom. Rob's expression hardened. What about her? She died last week. Heart attack in the prison infirmary. Aunt Caroline called the prison trying to arrange a funeral, but Mom had specified in her will that she didn't want any family contacted. Rob was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel about it? Relieved, Emma said without hesitation. Relieved that she can never hurt anyone else. Relieved that I'll never have to wonder if she might somehow get out early. Relieved that any children I might have will never be at risk from their own grandmother. And Caroline, still in prison, still writing letters asking for money, still refusing to accept responsibility for anything she did. Rob nodded with grim satisfaction. Good. Let her die in prison too, still believing she was a victim of circumstances beyond her control. Emma looked at her father with deep respect and understanding. You know what I realized during my confirmation hearing? They kept asking about mercy and rehabilitation, but they were really asking whether I think there are people who deserve to be destroyed rather than saved. And what did you tell them? Rob asked. I told them the truth. There are people in this world who view children as acceptable casualties in their pursuit of money and power. Those people have declared war on civilization itself, and they deserve to lose that war completely. Rob raised his glass again to Emma Mitchell, federal prosecutor and protector of families. To Rob Mitchell, who taught me that sometimes protecting innocence requires becoming someone others fear. As they finished their drinks, Emma's phone buzzed with her first case assignment as a federal prosecutor. A network operating out of Las Vegas had been targeting military families, using deployed soldiers' children as leverage to steal their military benefits and housing allowances. Dad, it looks like I'm going to need a consultant on this case, someone with experience in family protection and predator hunting. Rob smiled. I suppose I could make time in my schedule. Good. Because these people are targeting military children, and I want to make sure we destroy them so completely that it sends a message to every other predator network in the country. What kind of message? Emma's expression was pure steel. That targeting American families is the last mistake they'll ever make. As they prepared to leave the office, Rob reflected on the transformation of his daughter from a trusting 18-year-old into a federal prosecutor who was feared by criminals across multiple continents. Some people might see that transformation as a tragedy, the loss of innocence that should never have been necessary. But Rob saw it differently. He saw a young woman who'd learned the harsh realities of the world and had chosen to become a guardian rather than a victim. He saw someone who understood that the price of protecting goodness was being willing to destroy evil without hesitation or regret. Most importantly, He saw someone who would ensure that future generations of children grew up in a world where predators understood that targeting families would bring swift, certain, and final consequences. 3 days later, Emma stood in a Las Vegas courtroom, delivering her opening statement in United States v. Morrison et al., the case against the military family targeting network. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendants in this case looked at military families, families where fathers and mothers are deployed overseas defending our country, and they saw opportunity. They saw children who were vulnerable, parents who were distracted by the demands of war, and they saw a chance to exploit that vulnerability for personal gain. They created fake charities. They forged documents. They manipulated the system designed to support our troops. And they stole millions of dollars that were meant to support the families of those who serve. But what they didn't count on was that there are people who will fight back. People who will protect those families, who will expose their crimes, and who will make sure they face justice. That's what this trial is about. It's about protecting the families who protect our country. It's about sending a message to anyone who thinks they can exploit our military for profit. And it's about ensuring that the people who committed these crimes face the full consequences of their actions. Because in this country, we don't just protect our troops on the battlefield. We protect their families here at home. And we will not tolerate anyone who tries to take advantage of their sacrifice. Thank you. They saw children who could be threatened, spouses who could be isolated, and benefits that could be stolen. Emma's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years hunting predators and who understood exactly how they thought. Over the next 2 weeks, you will hear evidence that these defendants systematically targeted the families of deployed soldiers, using their children as leverage to steal military housing allowances, educational benefits, and combat pay. You will hear recordings of these defendants laughing about the terror they caused to military children. You will see financial records showing how they converted stolen military benefits into personal wealth. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. But most importantly, you will understand that these defendants declared war on American military families, and that this prosecution is our response to that declaration of war. The trial lasted 8 days. The convictions were unanimous on all counts. The sentences were life in prison without possibility of parole. As Emma left the courthouse, she found her father waiting by his car. "How does it feel to put away your first major network as a federal prosecutor?" he asked. "It feels like we're finally winning this war," Emma replied. "Every network we destroy, every predator we eliminate, every family we save, we're building a world where children can grow up without having to learn what we learned." "And if new predators emerge?" Emma's smile was predatory. "Then we'll destroy them too, completely, without mercy, without hesitation. Because that's what it means to protect families." As they drove through Las Vegas toward the airport, Rob felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that his daughter had become everything he'd hoped for and more. She was brilliant, strong, relentless, and completely committed to protecting innocence by destroying those who would exploit it. They both learned the hardest lesson of all, that love worth protecting required the willingness to become someone others feared. And they both accepted that responsibility without reservation. In the years that followed, Emma Mitchell would become the most feared prosecutor in America among those who targeted families. She would build a network of law enforcement professionals, private security specialists, and survivor families who would make family destruction networks extinct in the United States and increasingly dangerous to operate anywhere in the world. And she would never, ever forget the lesson her father had taught her. that when predators target your family, you don't negotiate, you don't compromise, you don't show mercy. You destroy them completely, and you make sure they never get the chance to hurt anyone else. Because that's what it means to protect the people you love in a world full of predators who count on their victims being too civilized to fight back. Emma Mitchell was living proof that sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is become someone predators fear more than death itself. The war against family destroyers was far from over. But with each victory, with each network destroyed, with each predator eliminated, the balance was shifting. And in the end, the predators would learn what Rob and Emma Mitchell had always known, that there are some things worth protecting, and some people willing to become monsters to protect them. The battle would go on, but the world was safer for families, because father and daughter never stopped fighting for what truly mattered.